There's this pattern woven right into the fabric of history. It's a cycle of rise and fall that pretty much every great power, from ancient Rome to Britain, has followed. It's this incredible story of ambition, of dominance, and, eventually, of decline.
And here's the thing. Every single one of them believed they were the exception, that their power was permanent, that their systems were just infallible, their reign eternal. But history, well, it has a funny way of humbling even the mightiest among us. The cycle always turns.
So what if the world's current superpower is walking down the exact same path, stage by stage, that led to the collapse of every single empire that came before it? All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. To really get a handle on where we might be heading, we first need to understand the map that history's already laid out for us. We're going to look at the cycle itself, see how it played out for empires in the past, then apply it to the United States, and finally, we'll see just how loud those echoes of history are getting.
So look, this isn't about random chance or, just bad luck. According to some really deep research by people like investor Ray Dalio, the rise and fall of great nations follows this predictable, almost mechanical sequence. He calls it the big cycle, and it just keeps repeating over and over again.
It all starts with a rise, right? Fueled by a society that's working together, great education, and game-changing innovation. This leads to a peak, a golden age, where the empire is the undisputed leader of the world. But that very success eventually plants the seeds of its own destruction, and that leads to the final stage, a decline, marked by just crushing debt, deep internal division, and eventually being outcompeted on the world stage.
And at the very heart of this cycle is one absolutely crucial element: money. Specifically, having the world's reserve currency. This means your money is the money that everyone else uses for international trade. It's the ultimate economic superpower. It basically lets a nation write checks that the rest of the world has to cash.
Okay, so here's the really crucial part. That currency dominance, it follows its own life cycle inside the bigger empire cycle. A nation rises through innovation, it hits a peak where its money is used in over 60% of world trade, but then comes the overextension, spending way too much on its military, racking up impossible debts. And this, inevitably, leads to that final stage, a total collapse in trust and a power shift to the next rising empire.
And hey, this isn't just some theory, right? It's a historical blueprint. So let's take a look at the ghosts of empires who followed this exact pattern, almost to the letter. Our first case study is the original global superpower, Spain. Back in the 1500s, they found actual mountains of silver in the Americas, which effectively gave them control of the world's money supply. Their silver coins, the pieces of 8, became the first truly global currency.
And their fall, it perfectly illustrates the cycle. They got completely stuck in stage 3, overextension. They spent all their silver on constant wars across 4 different continents. When that wasn't enough, they started debasing their currency, secretly mixing cheap copper into their pure silver coins, which of course caused massive inflation and totally destroyed trust. They borrowed and borrowed until they couldn't anymore, and because they had all this easy money, they stopped making things themselves. They became totally reliant on imports. All that silver flowed in from the New World, and then it flowed right back out again.
And the result? It was an absolute financial catastrophe. King Philip II, the most powerful man in the world at the time, declared bankruptcy not once, but 4 separate times. The empire built on silver had literally run out of money.
So, as Spain was fading out, this tiny new power rises up, the Dutch Republic. Now, they didn't have mountains of silver, so they invented something way more powerful: modern finance. They created the world's first central bank and the first stock exchange, making Amsterdam the financial center of the entire planet.
Their time at the top, powered by the Dutch guilder, lasted for 78 years. But, and you can probably guess what's coming, they too fell into that same classic trap. A series of incredibly expensive wars with a rising Great Britain, their main economic rival, bankrupted the nation, and their financial dominance came to an end. The cycle turned once more.
Okay, now for the big one, Britain. This story is fascinating. For over 2 centuries, the British pound sterling was the undisputed global reserve currency. The British Empire was so massive, people used to say the sun never set on it. Their power felt permanent.
But 2 world wars did what no rival ever could. The cost of victory was complete and total financial exhaustion. I mean, just get your head around this. By 1945, Britain's national debt was a staggering 270% of its entire economic output. The empire was flat broke.
And that brings us to this one, single room in New Hampshire back in 1944. At the Bretton Woods Conference, 44 allied nations got together to design a whole new global financial system for a world torn apart by war. And in that room, they made it official. The age of the pound was over. The crown of the world's reserve currency was officially handed to the United States dollar.
All right, so let's shift gears and talk about the rise of the United States. While the old world was literally in ruins, America came out of the war with its entire industrial base intact and its economy absolutely booming. It was ready to take the lead.
And for the next 50 years, American dominance was just unquestionable. The dollar was king, first backed by gold. But then, in 1971, President Nixon ended that link. The dollar was instead backed by an incredibly clever new system: oil. The U.S. made a deal with OPEC nations to make sure all major oil sales would only be priced in dollars. And since every country needs oil, well, every country needed dollars. This created this massive, constant global demand, cementing the dollar's reign all the way through the end of the Cold War and into the new millennium.
But the cycle is relentless, isn't it? And if we look really closely, the exact same warning signs that popped up at the end of the Spanish, Dutch, and British empires, they're now appearing for the United States.
First up, let's talk about the debt. Just like every empire before it, the U.S. has piled up a mountain of it. At over $36 trillion, the national debt is now bigger than the entire U.S. economy, sitting at a staggering 124% of GDP.
And then you've got the classic military overextension. I mean, maintaining over 750 military bases all across the globe is an immense financial drain. It sounds eerily similar, doesn't it? Like Spain trying to fight wars on 4 continents, or Britain trying to police a quarter of the world.
And look, these huge financial and military strains, they're not just numbers on a page. They are classic symptoms of that third stage of the cycle: decline. They go hand in hand with intense internal conflict, declining trust in our institutions, and deep political dysfunction. The very fabric of society starts to fray, just like it did in all those empires of the past.
So when you step back and put it all together, the pattern becomes, well, it becomes crystal clear. The question is no longer if the U.S. is following the cycle, but just how far down the path it's already gone.
Now this slide for me is where it all comes together. It's like an imperial checklist, and when you see it all side by side, wow. The symptoms are just eerily familiar. That massive debt that plagues Spain and Britain, we see its echo in America's 124% debt to GDP ratio. The currency debasement Spain used, you could argue it's mirrored in the trillions of new dollars printed since 2020. That military overextension that stretched past empires thin, it's reflected in over 750 bases worldwide. And the decline in making things at home, you can see it in a massive trade deficit. The parallels aren't just similar, they're nearly identical.
And here's the real-world consequence of all that: the dollar's dominance. It's slipping. At its peak around the year 2000, over 70% of the world's reserves were held in dollars. Today, that number has fallen all the way to 58%, and it continues to trend downward as other countries start to diversify, looking for alternatives.
You know, there's that famous saying, and it's famous for a reason. The details change. Spain's silver is now America's dollar. Their galleons are now aircraft carriers. But the underlying melody of the story is exactly the same. The rhyme is getting louder.
But here's the thing. Looking at this cycle doesn't have to be all doom and gloom. The collapse of an empire has never been the end of the world. It's a reset. It's a painful and, yeah, often chaotic rebalancing of global power that clears the way for a new order to be built from the ashes.
So we're left with this one big question. The pattern is clear. The stages are all laid out. The historical precedents are just undeniable. We've seen 3 superpowers in the last 500 years follow this script right to their downfall. And the United States is deep inside that same script right now. The ultimate question is whether it's even possible for an empire to read this map of history and choose a different path, or if the final verses of this historical rhyme have already been written.